Hello, everybody. I'm Courtney Jarman,
I'm Chantel Revelo.
and we're going to talk to you about our WMS Equity Task Force.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah.
So we hope to use this time today to go over our task force mission statement, the 4Ps, which is the framework we use to guide our work, how we hope to transform WMS into a more equitable school, and how we hope to use advisory.
So, our Equity Task Force mission statement, we're going to examine the current systems at WMS in order to evaluate where and when we perpetuate systems of oppression. Then we're going to come up with solutions to dismantle and replace those systems with ones that are anti-racist. And to do this, we're going to use our design thinking framework. And that first involved identifying 4 areas, or what we call the 4 Ps.
So the 4Ps is the framework that we're going to use to make sure that we are spending our energy and efforts focused on changing WMS through systems. Systems, as many of us know, stay a lot longer than people do. And so we hope to transform the systems here at WMS so that they remain anti-racist and more equitable even when we are gone. And so the first P in the 4Ps is policies. Those are the things you kind of see on paper, the rules and regulations that we need to follow. And we want to evaluate those to see who the language is including and who it's missing. The second P are the programs we have at WMS, whether those programs are happening before school, at lunch, or after school, or even within the school day. Who are those programs for? Who are we targeting? And how do we pick who gets to be a part of them? The third P are the procedures. How are those policies acted upon? We're thinking about our discipline policy. What do we do when students are chronically absent? How do we pick students to receive certain supports? And we want to evaluate how we use those procedures and how they impact students of marginalized identities. And then lastly, we have practice. How do the people who have power in our building use that power on a daily basis? And who do we push away with that power, and who do we continually bring closer? These 4Ps will help, again, us address that systemic change that we're looking for. But in order to do the 4Ps, we also have to evaluate where we are currently. We want answers, we want solutions now, but we can't do that without first evaluating how these 4Ps are being used currently. And so we're going to use design thinking to help us come up with those questions.
So within the 4 Ps, we have 4 committees, and each committee is tasked with addressing one, how might we question. The first committee is kind of teacher and paraprofessional focus. So they're thinking about how might we create space for the teachers and paras to think critically about how their practices might be perpetuating systems of oppression. So this committee is really looking at teacher and para practice. What are they doing? What are we not doing? And those are kind of their focus group. The second group is focused more on students. That how might we question is how might we help students gain the tools to become the change makers and forward thinkers who address equity and address white privilege. So they're going to be interviewing students and really looking at the 4 Ps from a student perspective. Our third committee is kind of blending the two and looking at grading practices. How might we change our grading practices to promote the inclusion and sharing perspectives of all students? So they're going to be interviewing kind of both sets in addition to families to say, how are we benefiting students and what can we do better with our grading practices for all students? Our last committee is how might we ensure marginalized students are represented in all areas? So that is everything from curriculum and kind of our everyday practices, but it's also what are we hanging on our walls? How are we speaking to students? What's the overall feeling and atmosphere at WMS for marginalized students, and how can we improve upon that?
So the main goal is to transform WMS to be a school that is more equitable and more anti-racist. And we also recognize that in order to do this work, we have to do it on different levels. And we need all of those levels to work in tandem towards this goal, which is ensuring that all our stakeholders students, staff, and families feel seen, valued, and heard on every level. And so the 4Ps will help us do that through the policies, practice, procedures, and programs, really evaluating those. Our design thinking is going to help us stay grounded in asking questions first and finding solutions with the help of all of our stakeholders. Instead of approaching the work as, oh, we have all of the answers, we want to acknowledge that we don't, and that we need to do a lot of work in order to discover those answers. The wonderful thing about Washington Middle School is we have a lot of staff who are committed to doing this work with us. And because of that, we're able to have those 4 subcommittees focused on one of those questions that are rooted in one of the 4Ps. And so together, we're all working towards that similar goal. And of course, we want to make sure that our students feel supported and equipped to do this work with us, because this work is mostly for them. And so we do that through clubs like Empower, our club for students of color, to have a space where they can feel empowered through their identity and their stories. We have Spectrum, a club for our students who identify as LGBTQA and their allies, to build community and inclusion for our students with disabilities and who don't, and they can come together to also build those friendships and community. And lastly, we have advisory, and that's new to us this year in the way that we want to really be intentional with that time so that we can equip our students with the tools to be change makers.
So why advisory? Well, there are 4 real answers to that question. The first has to deal with the reopening plan. So our school board decided that advisory is going to be a designated time for teachers to support students' social emotional needs. So we already had that time built in. And our teachers have been doing a really fantastic job of building relationships with students over these first couple of months to really build a community. And we're going to then leverage that time to make sure we are addressing those social emotional needs.
In our district strategic plan, we have 6 student outcomes, and there are 2 that we felt could really be targeted through advisory. And the first being outcome number 4, students will have the skills, knowledge, and courage to identify and confront personal, systemic, and societal bias. And we hope that through advisory, we can equip students with the skills that they need to confront those things and the knowledge that they need to understand them. And hopefully a space within our school where they feel like they can display that courage in order to practice those things with their peers and their teacher.
We also have outcome number 6. Students will be critical thinkers who contribute to and collaborate with our local, global, and natural world. So our advisory lessons start inward and really focusing on the individual student. And then throughout the year, we will be building out towards addressing more of a local and eventually a global and natural world. So we're starting small and then going big.
And at the heart of advisory is really supporting students' social emotional learning needs. And a big part of that social emotional learning work is creating a space where a student can really bring all that they are into the classroom so that they can process all of the things that they are being affected by, especially with this particular school year with a presidential election, the protests, the pandemic. So many of our students are processing so many different things. And for social emotional learning to work, for us to be able to say that we are doing social emotional learning in advisory, we have to create space for all of our students to bring all of the pieces of who they are into the classroom. And for our students with diverse backgrounds, that can be really hard. And so with these equity lessons, we hope to give all of our students, and especially our students of diverse backgrounds, the language that they need, the tools that they need to describe the experiences that they're having. And at the same time, we hope that through these equity lessons, our white students, their white peers, can also be given the tools and language they need to describe their own experiences in order for both parties to relate to each other and work together towards a common goal.
So our advisory lessons fall into 4 categories. These are based off of the Teaching for Tolerance standards, and we identified 1 standard in each category that we were going to focus on this year. We're starting with identity, and our target is that Bulldogs will recognize traits of the dominant culture, their home culture, and other cultures, and understand how they navigate their own identity in multiple spaces. So what that means is that we're really going to invite students to say, who are you? Who do you bring? What do you bring to school? And then looking out beyond that. For diversity, which will be our second one, Bulldogs will examine diversity in social, cultural, political, and historical contexts rather than in ways that are superficial or oversimplified. We're trying to acknowledge that these wonderful human beings are ready for complex things. And so sometimes we oversimplify, but what that leads to is, in the long run, longer confusion and not understanding the world that you're seeing and the way it's being explained to you. So really acknowledging that they're starting to get ready for complex ideas. The next one is justice. Bulldogs will recognize that power and privilege influence relationships on interpersonal, intergroup, and institutional levels and consider how they have been affected by those dynamics. So that builds on the previous two standards and saying, well, maybe I'm not personally affected by everything, but acknowledging that the student that you come to class with every day may be affected more than you or less than you. And how does that interplay with your own relationship with them and the relationship that everyone has with the world around them? Once we go through those three, then we really want to focus on action and empowering our students. So Bulldogs will recognize their own responsibility to stand up to exclusion, prejudice, and injustice. So we really want to end the year by teaching our students, now that you have all these tools, this is how you use them, and this is how you really stand up for each other.
So back to this slide. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that all our stakeholders, again, our students, staff, and families, do feel seen, valued, and heard at every level. And we truly feel like that has to happen with all of these layers in play. And most importantly, we have to give our students, our teachers, our staff, the tools that they need to help our students navigate all of these things. And so we hope through advisory, through our subcommittees and all the other things that come with it, that all of our stakeholders will feel seen, valued, and heard at every level at Washington Middle School.
Thanks for attending and listening, and let us know if you have any questions.